Welcome back to The Explainer. So in our last session, we already did the heavy lifting, right? We completely deconstructed the self using that brutal 11-step Madhyamaka reasoning on the three spheres. Since we've already covered that ground, we're not going to rehash it today. Instead, we are taking that exact same razor-sharp logic and turning it toward our absolute deepest existential anxieties: time, the sheer scale of the cosmos, and our own speculative views. Here's what we're looking at today. We'll start by moving beyond the three spheres. Then we'll deconstruct the past self, tackle the illusions of the future, explore the finite world paradox, dive into the butter lamp continuum, and wrap up with why the map is definitely not the territory. Let's jump right into part one, beyond the three spheres. We're shifting our focus away from the abstract mechanics of the self and moving into territory that feels intensely human. We're talking about the famous 10 undeclared questions, the ones the Buddha outright refused to answer. You know, those deep, almost obsessive speculative questions we all ask about where we came from, what our ultimate destiny is, and where the edges of the universe actually are. Nāgārjuna points out that all of these anxieties, whether it's about past lives or cosmic boundaries, they all boil down to one fatal cognitive bias. We literally mistake our conceptual maps for the actual territory. We construct these perfectly neat mental models of who we used to be or what the universe is doing, and we completely forget that they're just tools. They are the menu, guys, not the actual meal. They simply are not the indivisible reality as it is. Moving on to part two, deconstructing the past self. So let's look at our first major trap of time. It's our speculative view about who we were in the past. Think about it. When you look back at your life, you probably assume you're this fixed, solid identity just sort of traveling along the timeline. You automatically assume the you from 10 years ago is fundamentally the same you watching this right now. But the moment we apply Nāgārjuna's relentless logic to that idea, that assumption completely explodes. Just think about the sheer absurdity here. If your past self is exactly identical to you right now, well then absolutely nothing has ever changed. You'd literally be frozen in amber, which obviously makes the whole concept of the past entirely meaningless. But wait, if you swing all the way to the other extreme and say, okay, my past self is entirely separate from my present self, well then you hit a massive logical brick wall. Because here are the brutal, undeniable consequences of taking that entirely separate view. If past you and present you are completely disconnected from each other, the entire law of karma just breaks down. It means actions just vanish without any consequence whatsoever. And even worse, you could actually suffer the results of a total stranger's deeds. You'd end up with a self that arises without any cause at all, or a birth happening without a prior death. The entire foundation of cause and effect simply collapses in on itself. This brings us to part three, illusions of the future. Having totally dissolved the past and realized we absolutely cannot pin down a fixed self back there, let's look at how Nāgārjuna flips this exact same logic toward the future. We're always wondering what we're going to become, right? In the source verses, this is actually framed through the speculative lens of wondering if our future state will be human or maybe something divine, like a god. We just constantly project our current identity forward, trying desperately to grasp onto something that hasn't even happened yet. And this beautifully illustrates a massive paradox. Think about it. If a human simply becomes a god, which in this context implies a permanent, unborn state, then by definition, no actual birth into that state is even possible. Permanent things don't have beginnings, right? But if the human and the future god are completely disconnected entities, well, you can't have a continuum either. So we're trapped. Neither view actually works. All right, part four, the finite world paradox. Let's zoom out. Let's step back from the individual self for a minute and tackle the limits of the entire universe. Because just like we do with time, we try to place these rigid, speculative boundaries on the cosmos itself. We ask if the world is finite or infinite. We demand a concrete, black and white answer to whether reality has a hard physical edge, or if it just goes on forever. But watch what happens. If the universe is strictly finite, meaning previous states are utterly destroyed and don't give rise to new ones, then no further world can exist. It's game over. But on the flip side, if it's unending, and the past is never actually destroyed to make way for the new, how on earth can cyclic existence even function? You just can't have it both ways. Claiming that one part of reality has a hard, definitive end, while another part is unending is, logically speaking, completely absurd. Which leads us to part five, the butter lamp continuum. So if our fixed views of the past, the future, and the entire cosmos completely fall apart under scrutiny, what's left? Well, Nāgārjuna resolves this tension with a brilliant, highly accessible metaphor. He says to think of a butter lamp flame. A flame isn't a fixed, permanent object, is it? It's literally different from microsecond to microsecond as the fuel burns. Yet, it isn't a completely disconnected, brand new fire from moment to moment either. It is simply a continuous, dependently arisen process. Exactly like the flame of that lamp, the self and the world are functionally present. They are sort of there, yet not there. They act as this beautifully interdependent continuum. They absolutely do not possess absolute beginnings, and they do not possess absolute ends. They are entirely empty of inherent fixed boundaries. Yet, and this is the key, they function perfectly through dependent origination. And finally, part 6. The map is not the territory. So where does all this rigorous, mind-bending deconstruction actually leave us at the end of the day? Well, it shows us that true liberation isn't about finding the correct speculative view and clinging to it for dear life. It's a progression. First, we have to recognize that our concepts are merely maps. Second, we learn to act conventionally within the world, but without that suffocating absolute attachment. We act without acting, so to speak. And third, from realizing our deep fundamental interdependence, boundless compassion just spontaneously emerges. The artificial, rigid boundaries between self and other, they just dissolve. Nāgārjuna's concluding thought in verse 30 perfectly summarizes this entire journey. He points out that when you finally, truly realize the fundamental emptiness of inherent existence, something amazing happens. That desperate, agonizing need to cling to your metaphysical anxieties about whether you existed, what you'll eventually become, or if the universe has an end, it all just evaporates. It's gone. I want to leave you with this final thought to ponder. If every single view, every existential anxiety, and every fixed idea of who you think you are is just a conceptual map drawn by the human intellect, what happens when you finally let go of the map and just experience the breathtaking reality of the territory?